Serious. What stories about WW2 did your grandparents tell you and/or what did you find out about their lives during that period? Something sweet. My grandparents saved all their love letters sent back and forth during that time. They had just met and had fallen in love before his departure. So they carried on their romance and developed the relationship through beautifully written letters. Those letters expressed every emotion, from the realities and horrors of war to the abiding hope they'd be reunited safe and sound. They were married not long after grandfather's return. What's that story you've never been able to tell? This is probably going to get lost, but I just want to put it out into the void. I'm a recovering drug addict. I dropped out of school but would still show up on campus to pick up drugs or meet people. I was sitting outside the cafe one night waiting on some pills. I weighed 100 pounds. Soaking wet and hadn't eaten in days. There was this girl in the honors program with me when I was still enrolled, and we had many classes in that program together. She was a unique young lady. My friend and I bullied her in the past and didn't try to hide it. She walked by and asked me how I was, and I was so clearly sick. There was an awkward silence and she asked me if she could buy me some food. She took me into the cafe and bought me a cookie. I said thank you and we parted ways. I cried so hard that night. I was overwhelmed with guilt and gratitude and shame. I never saw her again. That was about 8 years ago and I remember it clearly, down to what I was wearing. I don't remember her name, but I will never forget her kindness. It was a bright moment in an otherwise sad time in my life. Wherever she is, I wish I could thank her. Serious, Redditors who witnessed a murder, what is your story? Saw a guy push his passenger, an old man, out of a car. The car was screeching speeding round a corner, the door flings open and the driver very clearly pushed the old man out. Not the greatest thing for a 10-year-old to witness. The even weirder thing was that as I stood there in shock while the old man was completely still in the road, a weird man walking past me chuckled and said, "It wasn't you, was it?" Then chuckled again. It hasn't affected my life but think about it every now and then. People who have survived an attempted murder, what is your story? I feel like I am very late to the party but my uncle was attempted murdered by random and pure bad luck. He was living in a high-rise and some crackhead pressed every single buzzer. Someone let him in out of laziness, not caring, wanting the buzzer to stop. The crackhead proceeded to knock on every single door down the hallways and my uncle is the first to answer the door. The crackhead pulls out a pair of scissors and plunges them into his throat. The crackhead then nonchalantly walks out of the building and says to a passing couple, "You should probably call the police because I just murdered someone." He was picked up very quickly, and my uncle survived. For a year or two before his epilepsy killed him. In addition, it was a very small world, as my uncle went to school with this crackhead 30 years earlier, and knew his name to identify him. Not that there needed any more evidence in the case. What is the most humiliating, awkward situation that you have ever witnessed in a classroom? One time, in science class in middle school, we were doing our end-of-semester presentations. Everyone was presenting their science experiments that we had all spent weeks on and counted for a significant portion of our grade. One girl, who admittedly was not the sharpest crayon in the box and kind of a ditz, got up to present. She was very excited about her breakthrough results. She went on about her hypothesis for several minutes, that light affected the vitamin C levels in different kinds of juices. She launched into detail about her experiment, which involved her testing different types of juices' vitamin C levels over a week or so period, by putting them in the fridge in both clear containers and opaque containers. That way, she explained excitedly, she could test which ones had more light from the fridge affecting their levels. You know where this is going. When she finally asked for questions and the silence was deafening, someone finally asked, "You know the light goes out when you shut the door, right?" It was my favorite science class. TLDR. A girl in my science class nearly fails because she didn't know the fridge light went off when you shut the door. What lie have you told for so long that it's become part of who you are? When I was like 15 years old, me and my friends got some cigars. This was my first cigar ever, and I suspect, in hindsight, the first for my friends, but we were all acting like we knew cigars, rating the cigar we were smoking, etc. I decided to one-up everyone by saying that it was an okay cigar, but not as good as a Cuban I had smoked. My friends jumped on me and pointed out Cuban cigars were illegal and you can't get them here, news to me at the time. I quickly covered up and said my uncle had brought them over from Cuba to a family gathering and he had let me have one. To this day, I am now 31. Anytime cigars come up, one of my friends will say, "Gene, you've had a Cuban cigar, right?" And I have to go, yep. And then brace for some line of questioning as to how they differ from the cigars we get here. And I make up some shit like, well, it's the way they're wrapped. That completely worthless lie is 15 years old. What's the most WTF moment you've witnessed in public? I was on the Berlin subway on my way to my uni when something big hit the train. I was right behind the driver's cabin, with a muffled sound, and even dented the door I leaned against with glass, dust, coming out of a gap. When the train finally stopped, I stumbled out, still shocked what happened, as I thought something solid and big must have hit the car. Well, it turned out, just as the train came into the station, a student jumped in front of the subway car, hitting the door in the center. The force was great enough to knock out the door, slamming it against the inner one to the passenger cabin. The poor guy was lying on the outer door along the driver's cabin, with the stunned driver sitting right next to him. And blood. Blood everywhere. 10 minutes later, I gave a presentation on how to solve a matrix in math class. Got an A+ for staying on topic even though I was shivering. What's the stupidest way you've injured yourself? Got in my car and started driving when I realized that my seat was too far forward for comfort. I reached under the seat to turn the lever that lets me slide the seat back when a deer ran across the road. I slammed on the brakes, still holding the lever, so the seat slid forward and I hit my head on the windshield. Have you ever left in the middle of a date? If so, why? She started talking about our wedding and our future kids on our first date. She wasn't joking around, and when I told her that it was way too sudden to be talking about that, she looked at me quizzically and said, "Don't you want to get married?" First online date I'd ever gone on. Plenty of awkward ones after that, including the girl who got drunk then admitted she had an infant son and lived with her ex-husband, but that one took the cake. What crazy ass story do you need to tell? When my mom was pregnant with me, she and my father divorced and he gave up all parental rights. I've never met him or spoken to him, I've only seen a few pictures. About 2 years ago, I worked at a healthcare facility where I would float to different offices around the county based on who needed the help. This one particular morning I was checking the doctor's schedule and saw my father's name. He was scheduled to be in the office next door to where I was working, and I thought it was pretty crazy, but I most likely wouldn't even see him. The time of his appointment came and he walked into my office straight up to me and says he had a doctor's appointment with Dr. X. My heart was racing because I knew it was him as soon as he walked through the door. I told him Dr. X was the office next door and he left. A little while later I walked over to the other office to deliver some faxes, and on my way out he trailed behind me and I held the door for him. He said thank you. And that was my one and only interaction with my father in my 30 years of living.